Well, following yesterday's decision by Parliament to make amendments to Section 25 of the Constitution, AfriForum this afternoon saying that it'll warn the international community about the threat to property rights in South Africa. Well, with me in studio is AfriForum's Ernst Roets. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Mr. Roets.
Thank you.
You've said that you believe that property rights in South Africa are under threat. What is that threat?
Well, the motion that was tabled yesterday in Parliament, our concern about that is, it can be summed up in 5 words. It's a destructive, dishonest, ahistoric, racist, theft policy. That's what it boils down to. And we can discuss any one of those 5 points. The entire mission currently is to attack Section 25 of the Constitution, which guarantees property rights. So it's an assault on property rights. And nowhere in this world has it ever worked where assaulting property rights or downplaying property rights will lead to economic growth. Every single time, everywhere in the world, people have tried that. It has always resulted in an economic decline.
Why do you feel that it is an attack on property rights?
Well, that's exactly what it is. It's an attack on property rights.
But I'm asking you to tell me why. Why do you feel that?
Well, because the point is to change the property rights clause in the Constitution that says that everyone has the right to own private property, and that property shouldn't be deprived from you without proper compensation, unless it's in public interest. So I find it hard to. I don't understand why you're asking me why. It's obviously an attack on property rights.
Who do you think is under threat here? What do you think is under threat?
I think the entire country is under threat. As I said, there's never been an example, there's never been a case study in the world where attacking property rights, where declining the right to own private property, attacking the free market, has resulted in some sort of economic growth. So yes, the primary target here is white farmers. But who will be targeted, who will be disadvantaged by this? Everyone. I think poor people will be disadvantaged most, and I think that's part of the problem here, and that's why we say it's also a racist policy, because the ANC and the EFF are so determined to hurt white people that they would rather have black people be poorer, provided that white people are less rich. This is what it's about. It's about taking property that belongs to white people, redistributing it, not to black people, but to the state, which once again has never worked anywhere in the world, and then having the state act as a so-called custodian. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a socialist, it's more than a socialist policy, it's a communist policy. And we can look at what happened in the USSR, we can look at what happened in China under Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, we can look at what happened in Venezuela, Zimbabwe, North Korea, we can go through the whole list. Nowhere has this worked. Every single time someone has done this, it's resulted in depression, it's resulted in severe poverty, it's resulted in conflict and in people dying in the streets.
You've spoken about the impact you believe this will have on white farmers, because it's essentially, in your words, taking from them and giving back to the state.
No, not giving back.
Are you having any appreciation for how this land came into the hands of those farmers?
Yeah, and that's why I say the policy is ahistoric. It's dishonest about the history in South Africa. South Africa's history, the history of land ownership in South Africa is a very complex history. The perception that we are fed is this brutal farmer stereotype. If you are white and you own land, it must have been because you've stolen it from someone. That's simply false. There are cases where that has happened, yes. And those were, I would say, in the minority of cases. And that's why we have a land claims process. And people have filed land claims and people have succeeded with those land claims. But ironically enough, 93% of people who have went through the effort to file land claims have said they would rather have money than land. So this notion that there's a hunger for land is also false. It's
a much more complex issue than you're allowing yourself to see, Ernest.
In what
people
way?
Are not just, we've just gone to Spamandla Goke, who's given us multiple reasons for why people opt for money instead of actually taking the land, but that's not what's up for discussion.
Other figures as well.
That's not what's up for discussion here. What you are saying is that you feel that this amendment is a threat to the country. In fact, you're going as far as embarking on an international campaign to call for some form of disinvestment in South Africa if the government goes ahead with this.
Well, that's the better alternative. It's either some sort of a campaign to put pressure on South Africa through disinvestment to stop this policy, or to stand back and have this policy implemented, and then we can all feel what it was like to live in China in 1960. That's what the end result will be if the policy is implemented. And this whole thing about we're going to expropriate land, we're going to have this assault on private property without damaging the economy. That's like saying we're going to aggressively expand KFC, but no chickens will be harmed in the process. It's fallacious.
Help me here. How do you see this process unfolding? You know, because you do seem to be in a state of panic and anxiety. How are you perceiving what the next steps will be?
Well, what the next step will be is that there will be a study, there's a committee that will investigate this.
Yes, beyond the work that Parliament has to do, because for all intents and purposes, that review committee will come back and, you know, if the amendment goes through in the Constitutional Court, what are you afraid of?
Well, what we are afraid of is the extreme level of cognitive dissonance within the AFC. It's called the cargo effect. The cargo effect means if you have all these elaborate goals and plans, you have something wonderful that you want to achieve, and you have all these plans, but there's absolutely zero connection between your plan and the goal. This is exactly what this is. The goal is prosperity for everyone. The plan is something that will result in the exact opposite.
I think it's beyond prosperity. It's about giving people what's duly theirs. So what I'm asking...
That's where the ahistoric comes in. It's not that simple. Let me give you an example. The notion about, and I'm not defending the Natives Land Act, but let's talk about the Natives Land Act, because that's what this is based on. The notion is black people lived in South Africa, white people came, they took 90 or 87% of the land, and they stuck black people in 13% of 13% of the surface of South Africa. That's the narrative currently. What is not said is that black people occupied 9% of the surface of South Africa. What is not being said is that if you don't have the technology to dig a borehole, you can only survive on 30% of South Africa's surface. But the notion that we are being fed, this brutal farmer stereotype, is if you are white and you own land, you stone it.
You're overlooking the fact that under that very same act, black people were not allowed to buy land.
No, they were allowed, but they had to apply, and more than 3,000 did so. I'm not defending the act. I'm just saying what is said about our history is false. Exactly what you just said now is false. It's not true that black people were not allowed to buy land.
They had to have some, it had to go through a white farmer that they would report to.
No, it had to go through the state, and 3,000 farms were bought by black people after that act, outside of those properties. I'm not defending the act. I'm not saying that was right. I'm just saying the narrative in this country is false. The narrative about history is false. It's much more complex than that, and we are being fed a history that is false, that feeds into this brutal farmer stereotype that feeds into the notion that the EFF would like us to believe that white people are criminals and should be treated as such, and as a result, this is a racist policy. There's nothing else about it.
Do you feel that the amendment treats white people as criminals?
Well, certainly it does. The whole amendment, the whole notion or motion is based on a false narrative. It's based on a narrative. It's based on a white perpetrator, black victim narratives. And yes, there are many white perpetrators and there are many black victims in this country. I'm not saying that's never the case. I'm just saying this broad overview stereotype about the brutal farmers is false. Those are the people that are feeding the country. Those are the people that are employing people. There's almost 1 million people employed in agriculture at the moment. All of that will be destroyed if we attack property rights.
So do you not see black people as victims of
No, they are victims.
Of
black people are the primary victims of this policy, because black people are the majority of poor people in this country are black people, and the people who will be struck most by this policy would be poor people. So black people are the primary victims here. They would be the primary victims of this policy, and that's why I'm saying they would rather have black people be poorer, provided that white people are less rich. So it's an assault on black people.
What are you going to be asking the international community to do, Ernst?
Well, we would like to inform them about what's happening in South Africa, the fact that there is an assault on private property. So that's the irony, is the ANC goes to Davos in Switzerland and says, we're open for business, please come and invest in South Africa, and at the same time they are assaulting private property. They have this assault on private property saying the state must own everything. So you cannot say to people, come and invest, your property is safe with us, but at the same time say, we're going to take the property and take it for ourselves. So people must be aware of that, and of course it will have negative consequences, and that's something that we don't want. But it's better than the alternative. It's better than to stand back and to watch this policy unfold.
All right, that's where we leave it for tonight. AfriForum's, for this afternoon rather, AfriForum's Ernst Roets giving us their take on yesterday's decision in Parliament. Of course, that was post the debate that parliamentarians had on the contentious issue of land reform.